Okay, good afternoon. I'm glad to see we've still got a lot of people in the audience. I think we're going to have a really good panel today. Welcome to Exploration in the Yukon and Why the North Delivers. I'm Ira Thomas, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with we're down to 5 industry leaders. We had one who's now stuck on a plane with Yukon Metals, so we're down to 5. And collectively, this group represents over $100 million in planned exploration for 2025. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that we're gathering on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tahan Quechan Council. The modern mining industry in Yukon is being built on partnerships, real, meaningful partnerships with First Nations that go far beyond consultation to include equity participation, employment, contracting, and shared decision-making. These partnerships aren't just the right thing to do, they're increasingly the competitive advantage that sets Yukon apart from other jurisdictions. Today's panelists all really understand this. These companies could deploy their capital anywhere globally. They could be in Nevada, they could be in Quebec, they could be in Australia, where the permitting might actually be faster or infrastructure better developed, yet they're here in Yukon, building relationships, creating opportunities, and working within our unique framework. Today, we're going to explore not just why they stay, but what all stakeholders, including government, regulatory partners, and First Nations governments here in the audience can do together to ensure the North truly delivers on its incredible potential. So what I'd like to do is to introduce my panelists and ask each of them to give about a 30-second to 1-minute kind of overview of their company's activity in the Yukon, and maybe we'll start on my far right with Kai Woloshin and Banyan Gold, please.
Hello, my name is Kai Woloshin. I'm the VP Project Development with Banyan Gold. I've been living in the Yukon now for 20 years with a career that spans environmental consulting, mining, and now exploration. And at Banyan, our focus is the Ormaque project, which is 40 kilometers north of Mayo. And we've got a project that we're advancing quickly, 7.7 million ounce gold project. And yeah, it's exciting times. We just finished our drilling last week at 42,000 meters.
This is Mike Berkey with Sitka. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike Berkey with Sitka Gold. I'm a geologist, but my fancy title is VP of Corporate Development with Sitka. We've got a project just south of Dawson, couple-hour drive out of there in the same belt of rocks as Banyan. Intrusion-related gold deposit. We've got about 3 million ounces of gold. Before we started drilling this year, 32,000 meters, we've made another discovery. It's an emerging gold belt that we've heard other people talk this morning about the opportunity in front of us, and we see this as being one of the drivers for that. So pretty exciting times in the Yukon.
Thank you very much. David, can you talk us through what you're doing with White Gold, please?
It's wonderful to be here. David D'Onofrio, CEO of White Gold Corp. White Gold Corp, our properties are focused just south of Dawson, starting about Dawson City all the way down to the casino and the coffee projects. It was assembled by Sean Ryan, a prospector probably well known to many of you, involved with working with Kaminak and making the coffee discovery early on, which glad to see now the team is going to be finally moving that forward to production and will really benefit us. I think one of the unique things about White Gold is the size of the land package. It's 300,000 hectares assembled based on the same protocols that led to the success of the coffee discovery, as well as the White Gold project, which we host. That's now a 3 million ounce deposit and is remarkably very high grade. Really, the highlight feature of our main zone, it's 1.1 million ounces, almost 3 grams. That's wide open for expansion. We've built a new team that's being led by Dylan Langell. He's a VP of Exploration. He was part of the Great Bear project from early days right through until Kinross. And now we're looking to continue to grow our flagship gold deposit as well as make new discoveries across our land package, which also we've noticed to have some other critical mineral prospectivities, which really shouldn't come as much surprise neighboring the casino project.
Thank you very much. Jason, can we turn to you now?
Thanks, sir.
You might just have to push the... There it is now. I think it's on.
There we go. Yeah, my name is Jason Weber. Thanks, Ira. I'm President and CEO of Silver North Resources. We're exploring in the Keno District next door to Banyan and Hecla. exploring Keno-style veins. We've been pretty successful in making some new vein discoveries, and we'll have news out tomorrow of another good result from the project. So I've been working in the Yukon since 1991. Left for a few years to work elsewhere in the world, but was drawn back just by the great geology that we enjoy here in the Yukon, but just such a great place to work as well.
Thanks very much. And last but not least, Richard, can we turn to you to talk about Trifecta, please?
Sure. So I'm Richard Drexler, President and CEO of Trifecta Gold. It's a spin-out company from Strategic Metals, which is basically a publicly listed project generator. It's out of the Archer Cathro group. So Strategic Metals sort of took a lot of the great ideas that the Archer Cathro team had put together over the years and put it together into a huge property package that's got over 82 projects up in the Yukon right now. And so the reason for Trifecta's existence is basically to take some of those targets and really demonstrate the potential of them to host world-class deposits. And so what we've done over the last few years is took the whole package of targets that Strategic put together in the Tombstone Gold Belt, sort of following on the successes of Snowline and some of the others on the panel here, and getting out and actually doing some exploration on a package of targets in that Tombstone Belt. And so this year we worked on a couple. We've got one at the Mount Hinton, which is in the direct extension of the vein system at Keno Hill, in the gold-rich portion of the system. So it's a target that has been explored for nearly 100 years now. So it's a long history there. And it's really a lot of the big veins that were found back when Keno Hill Mines was doing exploration in the 80s. And really it's just metal prices was the reason that Hinton isn't, I think, part of the big mine plan now. Is that back in the day they weren't even assaying for gold. So big opportunity for us just based on changing metal prices. Currently we're waiting on some assays from a possibly new discovery in this Tombstone Gold Belt, looking for these big reduced intrusion type systems. Drilled some nice looking holes this summer and we've got assays pending. We'll have some core in the shack tomorrow throughout the week, so hopefully everybody can come by and take a look. I came up to the Yukon in 2007, chasing my geologist girlfriend, who's now my wife. Fell in love with doing exploration in the Yukon and really fell in love with all sort of the community spirit up here. I mean, I came from a really small town that was built for a mine. And really, so growing up, I saw the benefits of mining firsthand. Teck Resources, Highland Valley Copper, they were just outside of the town I grew up in, and they provided scholarships for kids all the way through university, so basically paid for my astrophysics degree. And now they got me up here, and I'm in rock science now instead of rocket science, so happy to be here.
That is a great story, and I think a lot of us have had a long history in the part of the north and don't have dissimilar stories in the sense that it's the experience sometimes of growing up in a mining family or a mining community, or having an opportunity to experience the north where mining really is incredibly important to our northern communities. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a reality check here. It's interesting because in preparing for this conference, I was trying to get latest, greatest statistics, and Michael Gray this morning talked about his kind of assessment of money raised for the Yukon in the last 12 months is actually closer to $395 million. The government numbers that are official are sitting at much lower than that. But I think what it really speaks to is the fact that we're in a bull market. The market has come alive. Finally, junior companies are able to raise capital. And the question is, how does Yukon stack up compared to other northern jurisdictions and also globally? And I think when we look at it, Nunavut has been kind of leading the charge up until now in terms of dollars invested. Alaska also would be comparable. BC would be triple the expenditures we've seen in the north. Yet together, these 6 companies represent close to $100 million invested in 2025. So we really want to dig down and understand why. So I want to start with Sitka. 30,000 meters this year, Mike. This is your largest contract ever. Given the competitive realities, what global market signals really justified this massive commitment to Yukon specifically?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is the gold price, right? And that floats all boats. But I think what's really coming to the forefront is in exploration we see cycles, right? And each cycle matures after the next one. And we're seeing the reduced intrusion-related gold deposits that were initially discovered in Alaska, Fort Knox, and then people came over here in the late 80s, early 90s. They've gone through 2 or 3 cycles, and now we're seeing the maturing cycle where we're building on the success of others that were before us. We're drilling off resources. We're making great discoveries. I mean, Clear Creek, the RC Gold property, it was first explored. I visited it when I was the government geologist in 1992. When Noranda drilled, we all know Noranda's a great company to follow around. And then I was with Golden Predator when they were there in the 2010 and 11. So it's these reduced intrusion gold deposits that are typically sub-gram, the Snowline discovery showing that they can be much higher than a gram, our discoveries that are showing that they're better than a gram, Banyan having a higher grade portion of their deposits. So the maturity of these, the better understanding we have of them is really what's driving the gold exploration in this belt in the Yukon. It's not just the gold price. Believe me, we all love the gold price. But it doesn't matter if the gold price rises, everybody benefits from that. You still have to be the best discoveries. You have to have the best potential. Otherwise, it's just going to pass you by. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Yukon, is these discoveries that we're making are, you hate throwing the world-class word around too much, but they truly are. I mean, obviously, Snowline, the number of ounces that we're outlining in these types of deposits is massive. So that's really, in my mind, driving what we're seeing.
Thanks, Mike. Kai, let's follow up on Banyan. You're sitting on 7 million ounces plus right now on a road with access to power. Got a healthy share price now as well and ample cash. So can Banyan actually take this all the way? And what could the Yukon do to support and expedite development to compete with other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think, the freshest item, off the press here is this new, as of last week, is the power project, right? So Grid Intertie, the new project, the Northwest Corridor there that's been announced. So if the Yukon can really connect to the BC grid, it would be a massive gain, not only for the mining sector, but also the Yukon population. I think, as a Yukoner and others, who live here, we see the gap in our energy sector right now and these high prices. So I think we can have some strong legacy impacts with Grid Connect, and we can see this really benefit a project like Banyan, which would be, a significant mill throughput project. This year we've really been focused on, with a new geological model, targeting our high-grade zones. So with this, being on the highway and adjacent to an existing power station, we've got all the key infrastructure ready to get us into production in a very quick timeline.
Thanks, Kai. I think that's a good segue to David. White Gold has pivoted to include critical minerals in their portfolio. And as Kai has just been talking about, the federal government is committed $40 million to advance the BC Yukon Grid Connect, specifically for their critical minerals infrastructure fund. This could unlock clean power for all major projects in 10 to 15 years and potentially lead to billions of dollars in investment. So maybe a two-part question for you, David. What does this mean for your project? And given global competition for battery metals investment, is Yukon well positioned to capture its share?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that in two parts as well. So I wouldn't say we pivoted to critical minerals. I would say we've discovered opportunities for critical minerals within our portfolio. Our portfolio is 300,000 hectares. It's really large, and that's sort of follows Sean Ryan, I think, executing on the largest soil geochemical program in maybe anywhere in the world. So he covered right from Dawson all the way down to the Coffee, which is 110 kilometers, and east and west by 50 kilometers. And from that, cherry-picked what we believe is 85% of the targets in that area. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise that some of the targets that we've identified actually were primary critical minerals. So actually what we're in the process of doing is isolating some of those, maybe spinning them up to allow us to build a team with the specific expertise to be able to focus on that. The primary focus last year and going forward this year is going to continue to be mainly on the gold. And just to build on Mike's comment, which I thought was very good, none of us are in the business of spending money for the sake of spending money. Obviously, there's a lot more money available, and it's easier to access, which is great for the industry, and particularly the Yukon. But I think what we've seen, and it's a bit of a compounding effect, is as more work is getting done, there's more success, which provides for additional capital, which lets you do more work, which lets you have more success and provides for additional capital. And I'm going to paraphrase, or maybe it's more plagiarize, one of the points that one of the keynote speakers made at the Invest Yukon conference last year. And they showed a graph which outlined the discovery quantum of, this was specifically related to gold, of gold deposits in Alaska, the Yukon, and British Columbia. And we saw Alaska very high, the Yukon much lower, and then British Columbia much higher. And then they overlaid on top of that the dollars invested in exploration. And it was almost a one-to-one correlation. And then they zoomed into the last few years where we've seen the rate of investment increase in the Yukon, and surprise, surprise, we've seen a proportionate increase in the rate of discovery. So like some of the speakers said this morning, I think the Yukon has really just been largely overlooked. It's probably 20 years behind Ontario and hundreds of years behind other places in the world where you can work all year round very easily and less expensively, and that's what's driving a lot of this. Back to the original point, when it comes to critical minerals, that is the focus of, I think, the world right now. We're in a great time where it's not only become politicized, it's also become weaponized. So I think everyone's really woken up that we have to take care of our own country's supply chain, make sure we're not totally exposed there. And I think the Canadian government is also realizing, we are sitting on the largest resource pool per capita of any country in the world, and it would be negligent not to take more advantage of that. So we're seeing more capital coming in. All these projects are going to be extremely helpful. The $40 million for the feasibility study for the casino project, that's fantastic. We're next door to them. We're going to benefit. The northern, the resource gateway, there's two roads, one coming to the south of the casino, the other one coming down to the coffee. That comes right through our project package. We're going to be there. So we've been here for 9 years with White Gold. It's been a long time. We've been able to do modest amounts of work, but very meaningful. I think we have a large project on our hand now that has the potential to get much bigger. And to your point about the access to capital, we will now be in the position to do a 25 or 30,000 meter program ourselves next year. We've never done anything like that. That's 5 or 10 times larger. So we're in the position to really start to be able to move a needle. And I think this is going to continue to compound, whether it's gold or critical minerals or anything else. So it's just nice to see that it is this perfect storm for the Yukon, I think, at this point in time.
Yeah, well, I love that optimism. I think that's great. Do any other of the panelists want to comment on the Grid Connect and what it might mean to your project, or have we covered that off, do you think?
Well, I'm in favor of the concept of the Grid Connect. The more interconnected systems are, the more resilient they're going to be to any sort of shocks. But you guys need to realize that British Columbia had to import 20% of their power last year. So
Yeah,
where's that power going to
Columbians
come from?
don't know that.
Right? Where's that power going to come from to feed the Yukon?
Yeah, to your point, Richard, I'm aware of that too, but I think one thing about the grid interconnect, everybody views it as bringing power to the Yukon, but there's also projects in the Yukon, hydro projects that have been identified. With an isolated grid, you build a big power project, and if your customers, can't come through, well, you've just got a big bill. Right? So I think that will open up the gateway for the Yukon to be a potential exporter, whether it's, building a small nuclear reactor for casino or something like that. So I think that's an opportunity we don't think about as much, as that interconnect can be a two-way street, and I think it opens up opportunity. And I remember playing Monopoly against my sister, and I always landed on the utilities. And I won more than her, unless you got Boardwalk and Park Place. But it's very important, and it opens up another aspect of the economy that isn't something that the Yukon's been able to.
I feel like I have to jump onto that one because wearing my other hat, my strategic metals hat, this is exactly the thinking that we're thinking, is that there are made in Yukon solutions. There's a huge thermal coal deposit called the Division Mountain Coal Deposit. It's located just off the power lines. If you look at new clean coal facilities, if you look at the spin-off that you could use heat to generate, to power greenhouses. I know the TH for a number of years had a greenhouse project just outside of Dawson, but the cost to keep that heated. That's one of the other benefits of this cogen facility. Like say you did a clean coal, you're right at Division Mountain, they're right near the existing high voltage transmission lines. There's a huge potential here for the Yukon to develop a lot of its own power. There's already a feasibility was done on that deposit a number of years ago, and there's more than enough coal to, provide 80 megawatts for 50 years. from
Yeah,
what we already know there.
It's a
And-
great point, and, Alberta figured this out a long time ago. I mean, a lot of the, energy producers and oil producers in Alberta are actually major suppliers of power within the province, so it's, I 100% agree.
So some of that coal power is going to British Columbia anyways already. So.
Of course it is, they just don't know it. So Richard, while we're on with you right now, you're 4 kilometers from Hekla's operating mill. Infrastructure is a huge benefit for reducing exploration costs and development costs, but does proximity to infrastructure help up permitting and the speed of permitting? Is there any advantage there, or do you face the same timelines as a greenfield project?
Well, so far we've just been on the exploration permitting side, so I can't really
Yeah.
comment on anything past that. And to be honest, we adopted a 10-year land use permit from the previous owner when we optioned the project. So, we're sort of piggybacking off a lot of the previous work and engagement that was done by previous owners to get those permits in place. And sort of where we've been working on permitting and elsewhere in the territory, basically how we go about doing it is, as soon as we have claims, our first phone call is to the lands departments at the various First Nations to
Yep.
introduce the project, say, are we in an area that there's various sensitivities that we should know about, and we do that first and try to come up with a plan with them on how they want to see the project advance before we even submit to YESIB, and we've sort of taken that tact on all of our projects for more than a decade. I've been sort of the main liaison with Strategic Metals and the various First Nations through Yukon. So just peppering them quarterly with, here's our projects, this is the plans for the next year, this is what's happened the past year. And just trying to keep people up to date with a lot of those really early stage work, so that when you come to them, in 5 or 10 years after a bunch of, incremental soil surveys, and you say, now I've got a drill target and I want a drill permit here, then you're not just some stranger that's showing up for the first time.
Makes really good sense. So we've talked about the Grid Connect. The Yukon Resource Gateway project was announced in 2017 with 469 million, I think, committed. Just a show of hands maybe of our panelists, is you actually seen any impact on that purported investment thus far? And maybe a second question is that, how many of you had investors who talk about regulatory timelines in Yukon versus other jurisdictions? Is that something that comes up with your investor group? And do you see that as a challenge or an opportunity? Do you want to take that one, Jason?
maybe I'll jump in there. I think it comes up very often in our conversation with investors. And as you can imagine, you stand at the top of the hill on our project and we can see Eagle from there. And so I had a lot of questions early on, what does this mean? And of course we didn't have a lot of answers early on. But I think what kind of one of the benefits that came out of Eagle for working in the Atchinayak-Dun traditional territory was a bit of a working group came together, and we discussed the issues and how we approach it with the First Nations, with amongst ourselves, and so we came out of it with a kind of a working group that is now probably more engaged than prior. It certainly helps the smaller companies like Silver North. I'm in line behind Hekla, Banyan. You guys, when the nation has time to speak to exploration companies and mining companies about what's going on in their traditional territory, our project's small enough that we get pushed down the list. And as a CEO of the company, it can be frustrating, but I also see it from their perspective. There isn't enough time in the day to deal with all the companies active there. So we see this, having the infrastructure in the Keno district there certainly does help. It makes things easier. There's established knowledge of what we do. And then we also have, the more advanced companies like Banyan and Hekla that have been really good in sort of carving a path for the rest of us to follow.
I think it's great to see a community, and I think it's super important. And maybe that's a good, sorry, David, did you want to
I was
jump
just
in
going
on
to say, you mentioned the Resource Gateway.
Yeah.
So from an investor perspective, when that comes up, you see their eyes light up. Like, where else in
Yeah.
the world do you have governments proposing hundreds of millions of dollars of investment specifically to support mining exploration.
Yes.
Now, with politics, there's what do they say versus what do they do.
Yes.
But from our perspective, you ask, like, what have we seen today? There's not roads there today. But the road to the south coming to this casino is much further along. I think the road to the north from Dawson down to the coffee is a bit of a chicken and egg to see what's happening with the project. But for us, like specifically, as we look to evaluate a project, that type of support is very important. Jurisdiction's always been important. I think that this day and age is more important than ever. And in particular for White Gold, it's transformational. When you have our view, when we assembled this package so large, when Sean Ryan did, it was that we really thought that we owned like an entire camp. And our vision is that this is akin to owning something like, this much property in Timmins or the Abitibi 75 years ago. And the road really unlocks that leverage, because once the casinos are up and running, maybe in the coffee, and we'll have a crush and grind at White Gold. With the roads in place, you don't need to find 2 million ounces for it to be economical. You find a pit and you truck it to one of the facilities, as happens in any camp around the world. So for us, that's really what the company was built around, and now that we see it making meaningful progress, it's very exciting.
You're feeling cautiously optimistic at this point.
Cautiously optimistic. It depends how fast Pierre can get it built. So
Yep, no, that's great. I think there is a differentiating kind of factor on this panel. We've got those that have defined resources and kind of a plan to kind of grow that and move forward, and that's garnered a lot of market attention. And then we have earlier stage projects as well here, and I think we need to talk a little bit about the feeder system. The critical mineral exploration tax credit and mineral exploration tax credit were extended in the budget of 2025. But accessing these incentives does require quite a lot of administrative effort, and the feedback we get is that there's complex flow-through share compliance and reporting. And according to the Mining Association of Canada, without a robust grassroots feeder system, advanced projects will outpace new discoveries, creating long-term supply risks. I guess, panel, are we doing enough to support early-stage exploration in Yukon, or are we eating our seed corn?
I think just not in the Yukon, I think Canada in general. I think we've seen over the last few years, big projects, building battery plants in Ontario and the like. Fantastic, but where are the materials for those plants going to come from? And I think that is the key. That's the key issue is access for explorationists to get out on the ground and find new showings that are going to lead to drill programs that are going to lead to discoveries. Is probably the critical piece of the exploration mining timeline that I think is most underserved right now. And I think when you look at it from the perspective, like you brought up flow-through shares, there's horror stories out there right now of the CRA auditing companies saying that they bought a washer dryer for camp, and CRA won't allow that as an exploration expense. And it's, well, how are you going to get people to live in your camp if you can't get them to wash and dry their clothes? And so this is, and there's been recent cases where companies have taken on CRA and actually won. But this is the kind of thing as an early stage explorer we're up against. And then when you match that with, I remember coming to this conference 15 years ago, and there'd be, I'd talk to 20 different prospectors at least, and now that number's down significantly from that. And it's just, there's just not enough ability for the prospector to get out on the ground and find these new projects to sell, move up the chain to the rest of us.
I completely agree. Mike, go ahead.
To that, and I do think, we talked this morning, heard about the opportunities, but with opportunities come challenges. Prospecting, if any of you dabbled into it, it's a horrible business plan. A prospector today doesn't go out and find a rock and sell a property. A prospector has to think like an exploration company, which means soil sampling at, $75 all in. And you, as an individual, you're putting up $100,000 into a property before you can even get anybody's attention. The Yukon has a mineral exploration program that helps, but even putting $100,000 into a property, right now that money's not trickling down. So as I mentioned, we're in a maturing cycle in the Yukon, and there's a lot of great projects, but the last cycle saw the discovery of White Gold, Coffee, you know, Osiris, Attack, all these things that were made by prospectors. And, you know, I'll give the example. My son is a geologist, a prospector. We're all prospectors at heart, geologists, but he's working one of his projects this year. He found some mineralization that extended off his claims, followed them, found some good stuff, staked some claims. That's where it ends, because he's got to get a permit. He can't go camp on those claims. Somebody can show up and camp on his claims if they're hunting, if they're going for a hike, but he can't. He's got to wait a year to follow up on those excellent results. And so the opportunity, I mean, it's challenging enough as an individual putting, you know, money and sweat equity into there.
Yeah.
But then you have the challenge on the regulatory front. And, you know, there's things that we've done wrong in the past, including in Class 1, you know, being able to blow things up with dynamite and stuff. And we've been lobbying the government for years that, well, just take that out so that there's just, you know, regular old prospecting. And it's no different from hunting. It's no different from hiking, from camping, except you're taking a few rocks away. So that opportunity to change the regulation to help that early stage generation, because as you mentioned, Dave, the difference between BC, Yukon, and Alaska, I mean, the geology borders go north and south. They don't stop at political boundaries, and we lag behind BC and Alaska as far as major discoveries. We've seen a lot of that change in the last few years, but there's a long ways to go because there's stuff that's sticking out of the ground. We just need to mobilize people to follow up on that.
And from a regulatory point of view, like, that should be low-hanging fruit, right? That
so
shouldn't
easy,
be
drives me
difficult
nuts.
to make those changes, because we're talking about impacts that are really, you know, de minimis.
There's always room for improvement, but I will say on the other side, without a flow-through program, this industry would have been in big, big trouble for the last, like, 10 years.
100% agree. I mean, we commend the Canada for you know,
Fun fact, I actually have a
reinstating it.
master's in tax, and I did my thesis on the flow-through program like 20 years ago. Not that it matters, but there's room for improvement. And, you know, your analogy about the battery plant, that's totally true. I had a meeting, you know, last year with one of the companies that's from Asia building this plant, and their purveyors of the material, they have no idea where it's coming from. It's like the power line. So it's the politics. They have the good idea to get the, you know, the headlines, and then it has to be backfilled, but it does drive it, right? We're having the conversation, where's the metal is going to come from, so it's not all bad. Lots of room for improvement, I totally agree, but we have a lot of benefits here that aren't available other places in the world as well.
Yeah, I'm not saying do away with flow through, because I use it myself, but just the way it's administered, you know, there's some issues
could be
that
better,
need to be dealt with.
Good, all right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about First Nations partnerships and ESG, and we've got about 20 minutes left, I think, if that clock is correct. So let's address a critical success factor, First Nations partnerships. Several of you work directly with First Nations-owned companies or on traditional territories. This isn't just about social license anymore. It really is about business success. How many of you have formal agreements or partnerships with First Nations? And let's talk a little bit about what's working well. Do you want to start with you, Kai?
Sure, yeah. At Banyan, we're currently spending about 70% of our expenditures with NND-owned or partnered businesses. So it's really important for us not only to develop those relationships with the businesses that have agreements with the DevCorps, but it's more important for companies like ours to develop hiring and procurement policies internally to make these decisions that are quite easy, that will support developing these relationships and these partnerships. So for us, you know, it's really about, you know, our focus is on hiring local and supporting local businesses, and then working with those businesses to train the community members to have those jobs that these partner businesses offer as well. So it's not just flow through money that's going from one hand to the other. It's actually adding resources to these communities that we're working in. So it's, for us, you know, having these agreements with them and working with these companies is first and foremost where we started at Banyan.
And just to add to that, I think in the area where we work, in the Keno district, there is a number of businesses that are available to us that we can use. Like, we're pretty fortunate that way, that there's that mining history there, that there's these First Nations businesses that are available for us to use. For us this year, we probably spent, I'm gonna guess 80% of our funds are with associated First Nations businesses in the region. So, but they're available, and that's one of the advantages of working where we are.
That's awesome. David, you work across a vast area, as you pointed out. So that's multiple First Nations and relationships that you need to manage. And so how do you do that while keeping momentum?
We're actually pretty fortunate. I think almost all of our properties are in the Toronto-Quechin traditional territory, so we've been primarily working with them. To your point, they've had sort of this placer mine ecosystem as part of their culture for over 100 years now, so they have familiarity with the industry and they have resources and the ability to participate. When the company was created, this was a top priority to establish a relationship, and we've been continuing to work through that and putting in the appropriate agreements as we go along. So it's gone quite well, and something that's a major priority for us going forward as well.
Do any of the panel members ever see a challenge of over consulting, where some communities, I know in my experience, especially when you're early stage, they're hearing from so many companies at once, and sometimes the response is, can you just come back when you actually have something to talk about? We appreciate you want to keep us in the loop, but you're still at a very early stage. Let's regroup in 6 or 12 months. Do you think a lot of junior companies in particular feel the need to over-consult?
Yeah, I think we want to do our best, and to Jason's point earlier, in ND territory, which we're in as well. We formed a group of companies that are active there, and we're trying to make that landscape simpler because everybody's under capacity. We are, the First Nations are, the government is, so anything we can do to make that easier. And to your point, yeah, like we have no formal exploration agreement. I don't think our project's been of the size where that anybody wants that yet, but again, we're all in a maturing district. We're getting to that point, right? So that's probably coming next. But in the meantime, by engaging First Nations owned companies, by spending as much money as we can locally that we do as well, those benefits flow out, and I think the communities feel that impact. And so that's important to engage there, but definitely, yeah, I wouldn't want, 50 calls from 50 exploration guys telling you how good their project is every week. No, I used to be the government guy, and I had guys coming in my office taking up all my time half the days. So, I know what it's like, and so it's, you got to be focused and respectful of people's times and what their priorities are at the time, and finding out how to best, work within that parameter. But again, this kind of, it's probably a model that other people could use in other First Nation territories, getting together, doing their best to be respectful of that time crunch that everybody has and make it efficient. And then, things will fall into place. I think the days of, an exploration crew that is all out of Vancouver, it doesn't exist anymore. We have more people at our site that are Yukoners, than ever before, and everybody realizes the benefit of that. So it's common practice now. So it's we've come a long ways.
That's great to hear. Richard, do you want to jump in on this discussion?
Yeah, I guess with Strategic Metals, we were pushing to get early stage exploration agreements with sort of First Nations throughout the Yukon. And our goal early on was that we recognized the need for sort of that early consultation. And because that wasn't happening, that's really why this Class 1 notification came in. Yeah. And so, as being sort of the sea corn, as you put it, or the plankton of the system, as Doug Eaton always says about Strategic Metals, is, without that, none of these other projects happen. And so we were trying to get First Nations engaged at that early stage. Like I said, with Strategic, we approached not every First Nation in Yukon for agreements, just based on where projects are, but most of them. And we've had signed agreements with 3. I think currently we've got 2 signed agreements with First Nations for just the early grassroots type stuff, right? And our hope when we were developing those initial agreements was to try to circumvent some of the problems that are coming from this Class 1 notification.
Right.
And just trying to get ahead of it and really do the same work that is coming, or provide the same information that's coming from these notifications, but just do it in a method that's just formalized between us and the First Nation.
Yeah.
And because from the government's point of view, I mean, we're granted mineral claims. You know, why, if you're in an area where you're granted mineral claims, can you not work on your mineral claims? You know, and I guess one of the other things maybe I'll touch on is that that Class 1 notification was pushed in, I think, for a big reason was because land use planning isn't done up here. You know, we're lucky to have 11 of 14 First Nations have signed the umbrella final agreements, but part of those agreements was that the Crown is supposed to complete land use planning, which hasn't been done. You know, so we're slowly starting to work through that process, but there's some serious problems with that process, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of that really early grassroots exploration has pretty much ground to a halt.
Hampered.
And because from someone who's going to go out with the highest risk capital is that first stage, that prospecting that Ryan Berkey there is out doing, and you know, and that's the highest risk capital. And if then a land use plan comes down the next year and says, oh, this is an area where you can't have mineral claims. Well, he was granted those mineral claims, and he's invested a huge amount of money and time and effort into that. And so far in this land use planning process, there's been no compensation for any claims that have been expropriated or de facto expropriated because they've basically been cut off so you can't access them anymore, but your mineral claims are still in good standing, so they're not expropriated. So the companies aren't receiving any sort of compensation for going out and doing all that early stage exploration. And so Strategic Metals, for example, is one of the largest claim holders in the Yukon. And over the past few years, we've basically ground our exploration to a halt. We've been doing almost nothing for early stage targets. We've selected some of our more advanced assets, and we're focused on advancing those because we can dedicate, okay, this is already something real. So like we can, you know, talk to the communities about working on that specifically, but in terms of sort of going out and doing a regional work, I mean, there's absolutely no guarantee that all that money is just going to be wasted based on how the current land use planning process is working. So that's a real issue that I'm hoping that this current government addresses, because that would do a huge amount to try to revitalize that real grassroots, the plankton or the sea corn in the Yukon.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we've got some members of the new government in the audience, and the purpose of this conversation is to really highlight some of the, not only the strengths, but some of the challenges and what needs to change if we're going to do what Pierre said this morning, which is take advantage of the opportunity that exists right now because of markets and because of the Yukon's, you know, absolutely stellar geology. Why don't we talk a little bit about, since we're on the subject of risk, maybe we can talk a little bit more with Jason about major junior partnerships and how that helps or hinders in kind of navigating this complex landscape.
Yeah, it's the traditional, like Strategic, who's a big joint venture model company. I used to run a company that did that, and one of the key tenets of it is obviously you had a partner who would come in and spend money on your project, but we also really put a high value on the expertise that the incoming group could bring. And so we always focused on, you know, we're a small junior group, there's 4 or 5 of us, we have our set of skills, but if you can bring in a partner who can bring capital and an expertise to the table, that really adds value for your shareholders. And, you know, the current situation for us at Silver North is one of our secondary projects is in the Silvertip area, just on the Yukon side of the border. And Coeur's been doing some wonderful work down there, building on the resource at Silvertip, but also taking a more of a systems-based approach, exploring the region, identifying this CRD district that is more than just Silvertip. And we've got an option with them. They're earning in up to 80% by bringing the project to a feasibility study. But it's their people that are working at Silvertip itself. They're the ones that have been successful growing that resource. They're now applying that to our exploration at our TIM projects, and that's really valuable for us. As far as, you know, not just the money that comes to the table, they can do it much more efficiently than we would ourselves, but it's that expertise that really adds value for our shareholders as well.
Thank you very much. Maybe switching back to Kai for just a moment. You know, Banyan has had a great year. You've got a healthy treasury. You're funded. Do you have some advice for earlier stage companies that are trying to get into the Yukon and get active in this region? And maybe I'd put that to all three of our more advanced companies there as well.
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years we've really seen an increase of ESG focus at the grassroots level, and so one thing that's become more and more important is the collection of baseline data collection, as an example. So now we are seeing in the environmental assessment process the requirement for potentially wildlife studies or water quality surveys. So the industry needs to start looking at that as a stronger investment. Again, this is more capital that needs to go into these activities, but it's something that moving forward the Yukon is really expecting companies to do. So it's something that's not only going to save you time when you do go for your Class 3 or Class 4 permit, but it's something that will build that relationship with your your First Nation partners.
I think it's a really good point, Kai, because we didn't really touch on the environmental stewardship piece as we got into the discussion on First Nations, but it's a critical element. And we've had a long-term advisor to our group of companies that has always been drilling that into us since day one. You've got to get in there early and start collecting that information. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it sure becomes valuable as you're advancing your project into the permitting phase. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about the path forward. And, I think we've kind of covered this off somewhat, with David being the real kind of glass half full, and maybe a few others highlighting some of the challenges. But if government today could guarantee one major infrastructure project, what do you think would have the biggest impact? Would it be roads? Would it be the power generation, the BC Grid Connect, or is there some other priority, maybe communications, that you think could really move the dial? And maybe I'll just ask each of you individually. Richard, do you want to start?
I mean, aside from trying to finalize land use planning, I think the road piece is huge.
Critical.
Yeah, and I think the new road legislation that was being worked on, where in terms of, once a road goes in, it's an invaluable piece of infrastructure for a company. So if they have to get basically decommissioned each time, then sort of when the next wave of exploration comes through, which might not be for 10 or 15 years, if that infrastructure is gone, then it doesn't really help things in the long run.
It needs to be a long-term investment.
Yeah. So management of access is obviously very important, though. So it's definitely a delicate subject around building roads.
Understood. Jason?
I'd say all of them, really. But if you pin me down, I'd say the power. I think the Grid Connect and power generation here is just looking at the advanced projects that are online right now, and where the power is going to come from to feed those. I think that's Pierre said it earlier today. Electricity is life, and it's definitely life for a mining operation. And I don't think these projects go ahead without that. So,
Fair enough. David?
Yeah, those are huge. The other thing is permitting timing, right? It's changed that valley of death into a gully of death, maybe. Shave off a few years. And,
Small steps.
Yeah, and so it all helps. Yeah, there's 5 points. Probably we're going to each touch on one.
Mike?
Yeah, the grid interconnect is the thing I think is huge. Like I said, not only because it has the potential to bring power up, but also send power down. We can develop a new industry that the Yukon really isn't participating in, which is a big utility. And obviously road infrastructure, it's pretty nice for folks like Banyan and Sitka Gold that are really close, and you as well. But definitely, with technology, distance from existing infrastructure is getting smaller. Another thing that really caught my attention at a conference earlier this year was watching the IAMGOLD CEO talk about their automation in some of their newer mines, and that's a big challenge in the north. Is we got to fly tons of people in and out. Now, Joe Sparling doesn't mind that, and most Yukoners don't realize how their low airfares are being impacted by the mining and the exploration industry. But I think in the future, some of these future mines that we're talking about may see a lot more automation and a lot less need for that fly in, fly out. So those, the technology that is advancing in this industry. I mean, it's amazing, you know, you can have a guy shoveling dirt and the smartest engineer in the world sitting beside each other in the cafeteria and getting good ideas from each other. Such a cool industry. I love being involved in it from that aspect. So, but it is advancing. It's a very advanced industry, and all those technological things that we knock off one at a time is going to make us that much better, leading by example, and we'll see the benefits of that, and hopefully overcome the image of the seven dwarfs not knowing what they're mining for, right? I think those days are over. So, I look forward to that because I love this business, and I want to make everybody else love it and realize what an important thing it is in our lives. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mike. That's great.
I'll touch on three things. Touch on two things quickly. Grid interconnect is obviously the most important thing for us. Our main resource is called power line. It's discovered underneath the power line beside the substation. So, the connection there is so important for us to have an economic site. The second one is the Gateway project. We're really looking forward to the Silver Trails upgrade there. There's a good section there that's funded, that's started the environmental assessment process for the first phase. So we're really looking forward to that happening. But I would say the third catalyst really for us is this new mineral legislation, right? It's something that's long overdue. It's something that we've seen in the news quite a bit. There's a lot of erosion of trust, between the government and First Nations. And so we really need this new mineral legislation to have stronger partnerships with First Nation moving forward. So I think for us, getting that new mineral legislation from this new government is going to be really key for our industry.
Thank you very much. That's terrific. I think we're going to kind of move into a few closing remarks now, and hopefully there's time for a couple of questions. But we've really heard today from these 5 companies that are investing significant capital in Yukon in 2025. They're supporting hundreds of jobs and numerous First Nations partnerships. But we also heard that, exploration dollars are mobile, and we can't fall asleep at the switch here. Every dollar can go elsewhere at any moment. I think the message is really clear that the Yukon has world-class geology, it has committed First Nations partners ready to participate, and companies willing to invest. But geology and goodwill don't write checks. Investment decisions are made comparing jurisdictions on permitting speed, infrastructure, meaningful partnerships, and regulatory certainty. And so to our government and regulatory partners here today, these companies aren't asking for lower standards, they're asking for faster decisions, clearer pathways, and recognition that First Nations partnerships represent the future of responsible exploration. In a global competition for exploration dollars, being good isn't really enough. We need to be better. The North can deliver, but only if we choose to make it competitive through infrastructure, including these game-changing BC Yukon Grid Connect projects, meaningful partnerships, and efficient regulation. Thank you to all of the great leaders here today that have shared their insights. I think it's been a great discussion, and we wish you continued good luck in your investments in the Yukon. Thank you very much.